What if I told you that everything you desire is actually the source of your suffering? That every moment of happiness is merely the brief absence of pain? That the very act of wanting anything condemns you to eternal torment? And what if I told you that the man who discovered this truth lived it so completely that he became one of history's most brilliant and most miserable philosophers? These aren't the words of a modern self-help guru or some internet philosopher chasing views. They're the foundational insights of Arthur Schopenhauer, the man who saw through the illusion of human happiness 2 centuries before psychology caught up. Schopenhauer wasn't trying to be edgy. He wasn't performing nihilism for attention. He was a brilliant philosopher who stared into the abyss of human nature and wrote down what he found there. And what he discovered was so disturbing, so fundamentally challenging to our assumptions about life, that the world needed decades to even begin processing it. Today, we call it depression, we call it anxiety, we treat it with medication, therapy, optimization. But Schopenhauer understood something we're only now rediscovering. This isn't a bug in the human system. It's a feature. Born into wealth in 1788, Schopenhauer seemed destined for happiness. His father was a successful merchant, his mother a celebrated novelist. But beneath the surface of privilege, darkness was already taking root. At 17, he witnessed his father's mysterious death, possibly suicide. That trauma would shape his entire outlook. He saw firsthand how even success and wealth couldn't protect against the fundamental suffering of human existence. Unlike other philosophers who only theorized about misery, Schopenhauer lived it. His relationship with his mother was toxic. His romantic life, a series of disasters. His early work ignored. His lectures, empty. He became the perfect laboratory for studying human misery. At the heart of his philosophy was the idea of the will, not your personal will, but a blind, irrational force that drives all existence. Think of it as life's desperate hunger to perpetuate itself, using you as its vehicle. The will isn't about your happiness. It's about reproduction, ensuring the species continues, regardless of your individual suffering. You think you want that promotion because it'll make you happy. You think you want that relationship because you've found the one. Schopenhauer would tell you, you're being manipulated. The will is pulling your strings, making you dance to its endless tune of desire. Every craving you feel for food, for sex, for status, for meaning, isn't really yours. It's the will, using your consciousness as its puppet stage. And here's the darkest part. The will doesn't care if you're happy. It only cares that you keep wanting, keep striving, keep the cycle going. As he wrote, all willing springs from lack, from deficiency, and thus from suffering. You suffer when you want something. You suffer when you don't get it. And if you do get it, you suffer from boredom until the next desire appears. For Schopenhauer, human life is a pendulum, swinging between want and boredom. There is no stable middle ground called happiness. Think about your last big purchase. That anticipation, that certainty, it would finally make you content. And then, nothing. Maybe a brief spark of satisfaction before the emptiness crept back in. It's the same with career success. The promotion, the recognition, the brief high, followed by the realization you're still the same person. just with a different title. Or relationships, the intoxicating early stages, followed by familiarity, disillusionment, and eventually, boredom. We mistake the temporary relief from wanting for actual joy. But relief isn't joy. It's just the absence of pain. Modern psychology calls this the hedonic treadmill. We always return to baseline. Lottery winners, amputees, both eventually level out. Schopenhauer saw it long before science did. We're not broken. We're working exactly as designed. And the design is cruel. But Schopenhauer's darkness goes deeper. He believed that your sense of being a unique individual is fundamentally an illusion. You think you're separate from everyone else, that your desires and your fears are uniquely yours, but you're not. At the deepest level, there is only one will expressing itself through billions of apparent individuals. Your jealousy of others, your competition, your sense of isolation. It's all based on a cosmic misunderstanding. You're competing with yourself. You're envying yourself. You're fundamentally alone because there is ultimately only one consciousness experiencing itself as subjectively. Think about it this way. When you see someone succeed and feel envy, you're literally envying yourself. When you compete with others, you're competing with other expressions of the same fundamental force that drives you. This illusion of separateness creates most of our psychological suffering. We compare ourselves to others as if they were truly other. We compete for resources as if there were genuine scarcity in consciousness itself. This is why compassion was so important to Schopenhauer, not because it's morally good, but because it's a recognition of truth. When you see through the illusion of separation, you realize that harming others is literally self-harm. Their suffering is your suffering, because there is no meaningful distinction between self and other. But understanding this intellectually does not make the suffering disappear. Schopenhauer knew this. He lived it. Even with his profound insights, he remained fundamentally unhappy, proving his own point about the inescapable nature of suffering. Let's go deeper into the psychology of desire itself. Schopenhauer understood something that modern consumer culture desperately tries to hide. Desire is inherently unsatisfiable, not because we can't get what we want, but because the act of wanting is itself the problem. Every fulfilled desire simply creates space for new desires to appear. Think about modern dating culture. Dating apps promise endless options, infinite possibilities for connection. But abundance brings its own suffering. The paradox of choice becomes the tyranny of never being satisfied, because there's always someone better, just one swipe away. Or look at social media. Every post, every like, every comment feeds a craving for validation that never lasts. The dopamine hit is brief, then comes the hunger for more and more and more. Schopenhauer saw the same pattern in his own time. He watched people chase wealth, status, romance, recognition, only to discover that achievement never satisfied. It only produced new forms of wanting. The fitness industry tells you the perfect body will make you happy. The self-help world says the right mindset will solve everything. The career ladder whispers success will give your life meaning. But Schopenhauer would say, these are all illusions, variations of the same trap. You're trying to use desire to escape from desire, trying to use the will to overcome the will. It's like trying to lift yourself by pulling on your own bootstraps. The very effort makes the problem worse. This brings us to Schopenhauer's personal darkness. His philosophy wasn't abstract theorizing, it was lived experience. He embodied the pessimism he preached. After his father's death, Schopenhauer's relationship with his mother grew increasingly toxic. She was a celebrated novelist at the center of literary salon culture, while he was developing ideas that most people found disturbing. She once told him his writings were nothing more than spiritual poison. Their final break was permanent. He never spoke to her again. His romantic life was a series of disasters. An affair with a maid produced an illegitimate child that he never acknowledged. His relationships with women were marked by suspicion and contempt. He genuinely believed women were intellectually inferior, that their existence was tied to the will's endless drive for reproduction. Professionally, he was ignored for decades. When he lectured at the University of Berlin, his classes were scheduled at the same time as Hegel's. Hegel, the most popular philosopher of the age. The students chose Hegel. Schopenhauer spoke to empty rooms. He lived alone for most of his life, with only his beloved poodle for company. He trusted animals more than humans, because animals, he said, were more honest about their nature. Every single day, he witnessed his own philosophy playing out in his life. The desires that tormented him, the loneliness that consumed him, the ambitions that remained unfulfilled. All of it confirmed his pessimistic worldview. Schopenhauer was both the scientist and the specimen in his lifelong study of human misery. So, is there any escape from this pessimistic vision? Schopenhauer believed there were two temporary reprieves from the tyranny of the will. The first was aesthetic experience. When you're truly absorbed in beauty, a sunset, a piece of music, a work of art, something remarkable happens. For a moment, you stop wanting. You stop being an individual with desires, and you become pure perception. The will releases its grip, and you experience what Schopenhauer called will-less knowing. Think about the last time you were completely absorbed in a piece of music, not analyzing it, not comparing it, just experiencing it. In that moment, you weren't wanting anything. You weren't planning for the future or regretting the past. You simply were, or imagine standing before a great work of art. That instant of complete absorption where you forget yourself, forget your problems, forget your desires, and become pure witnessing consciousness. These moments prove that escape is possible, even if only for a while. They're glimpses of what consciousness could be without the constant tyranny of wanting, but aesthetic experience is rare and brief. Most people never truly encounter it, and even those who do must eventually return to the world of desire and suffering. Schopenhauer himself found solace in music, especially in Beethoven and Mozart. He believed music was the most direct expression of the will itself, and therefore the closest we could come to understanding our own nature. But even this escape was temporary. The symphony ends, the painting fades from memory, and we return, once again, to the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. Perhaps nowhere is Schopenhauer's darkness more evident than in his views on love and sexuality. He saw romantic love as the cruelest trick the will plays on human consciousness. What we call love, Schopenhauer argued, is nothing more than the will's strategy for genetic survival. You're not drawn to someone because they're your soulmate. You're drawn to them because your unconscious has calculated that your genes and their genes would produce strong offspring. The intensity of romantic obsession, the feeling that you can't live without them, the willingness to sacrifice everything, all of this is biology, manipulating psychology for reproductive ends. And once reproduction occurs, or the possibility passes, the passion fades. What once seemed like eternal love reveals itself as temporary madness induced by genetic programming. Schopenhauer saw this pattern in his own life and in the lives of others. Passionate beginnings, followed by disillusionment, then bitter coexistence or painful separation. Even parental love, which seems so pure, he reduced to the same biological logic. Parents sacrifice for children, not out of selfless devotion, but because evolution has programmed them to protect their genetic legacy. This view of love as biological manipulation was perhaps the darkest aspect of Schopenhauer's philosophy. It stripped away the last refuge where people believed they could find genuine happiness. Schopenhauer believed there was only one permanent escape from the will's dominance: the complete denial of the will to live itself, not suicide. He saw that as ultimately affirming the will, because suicide is not transcendence, but a violent reaction against suffering. What he meant instead was the total renunciation of desire itself. This is why he was so drawn to Eastern philosophy, to Buddhism and Hinduism. He saw in them a practical path to what he called the denial of the will. Through extreme asceticism, through meditation, through complete withdrawal from worldly concerns, some rare individuals could turn the will against itself. They could achieve a kind of living death that was simultaneously liberation. The saint, the mystic, the true ascetic. These figures had somehow found a way to stop wanting, to stop being driven by the blind force that torments ordinary consciousness. But Schopenhauer was brutally honest about this path. It is not for most people. It requires a kind of spiritual genius that is vanishingly rare. For the vast majority of humanity, there is no permanent escape, only temporary reprieves, moments of aesthetic beauty, flashes of compassion, and the knowledge of why we suffer. And perhaps, Schopenhauer thought, this knowledge itself is a form of liberation, not liberation from suffering, but liberation from the illusion that suffering can ever be permanently overcome. Schopenhauer's vision is undeniably bleak. He offers no easy comfort, no life hacks, no simple solutions to the human condition. But there is something liberating in his uncompromising honesty about what we are when you realize that your discontent is not a personal failure, but a fundamental feature of consciousness itself. You can stop fighting reality and start accepting it. You cannot escape the pendulum between wanting and boredom, but you can at least understand why it swings. You can stop blaming yourself for desires you never chose. You can stop expecting that the next achievement, the next relationship, the next purchase will finally bring lasting satisfaction. You can even develop compassion for others who are trapped in the same predicament. Their envy, their competition, their cruelty, all spring from the same source as your own suffering. And perhaps, most importantly, you can stop taking the whole thing so personally. The will that drives you is the same will that drives all of existence. You're not uniquely cursed. You're simply conscious enough to see the curse clearly. In his final years, Schopenhauer lived to see his work finally recognized. The world had caught up to his dark insights, but by then, he was too set in his pessimism to find much satisfaction in belated success. He died alone in 1860, having spent his entire adult life documenting the mechanics of human misery. His final words were reportedly about the beautiful spring morning outside his window, a fleeting moment of aesthetic transcendence at the very end. And perhaps that understanding itself is a kind of freedom, not freedom from suffering, but freedom from the illusion that we should be free from suffering. The darkness Schopenhauer explored is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be understood. And in that understanding, perhaps we find, if not happiness, then at least a kind of peace.